So there are many games recently that are deciding to add microtransactions and loot boxes into them, and people have been absolutely losing their shit about it. Some have implemented them in different ways than others, however the premise stays the same always. People see the word loot box and they immediately think the whole product has been tarnished because of this. A great example of this is Shadow of War that came out recently. I've played much more of the game since my last video, and not once has it forced me to buy a loot box, not once has it even recommended it to me, and I even got a loot box in the game through doing an activity without even realizing it. However, people just see the word loot box without playing the game and completely lose their shit over it and say the whole product is tarnished, the game's shit, and how could this company do this to us? And I just don't really see the reason why. People have done the same with Assassin's Creed Origins. They've seen loot boxes, haven't done research into it, and they've just thought that it's a pay-to-win piece of shit game that's been completely ruined by loot boxes. And I'm going to be talking about the issue with loot boxes and microtransactions today. It's something that many people have been talking about, and I'm just going to give my opinions on it. You can say that this is kind of an extension of my last video with the section that I talked about loot boxes in Shadow of War. However, I'm going to be talking about AAA titles in general, opposed to just Shadow of War. Although Shadow of War will actually be included in this video because it is one of the prime examples of loot boxes in AAA titles today. Anyway, without further ado guys, let's get straight into today's video. First of all, I want to clear up the fact that I do not support microtransactions. Many people with the tone I'm using in this video and with my opinions, you may think I support microtransactions and they should be in all AAA titles and they're great, and no, of course they're not great. They're a way of companies scumming money out of people that don't have enough time to play the game and feel obliged to use these packs to get an advantage over people that are playing the game normally and obtaining rewards that the game gives out naturally. So no, I don't think these are a good thing, and if they were to be taken out of video games, I think it'd be much better for everyone, because it'd mean that companies would focus less on pushing these microtransactions and they'd focus more on putting content in the game that is actually useful to people. However, it's not to say that I feel the same about loot boxes. Loot boxes and microtransactions are two completely different things. Sometimes they're used in conjunction with each other, and loot boxes can also have microtransactions attached to them, which is something that many people get wrong here. People think microtransactions and loot boxes are one and the same, and that's completely wrong. Commonly, fair enough, they are used together, so I can see why people would associate loot boxes and microtransactions. However, there are quite a few games that have loot boxes that don't require you to pay money, such as Horizon Zero Dawn. That game actually does feature loot boxes that you can buy from vendors all across the map, and you can also find them. And there's also Assassin's Creed Origins that's coming out soon, in which you can get loot boxes in-game with in-game money. From my time playing the Battlefront 2 beta, I was awarded with many loot boxes simply from playing the game, and there's also a daily loot box you get for free without even having to play, and that gives you rewards in the game as well. What I'm saying is there's plenty of games that have loot boxes, but they're still criticized because people think loot boxes and microtransactions are the same thing. Fair enough, Battlefront 2 definitely has microtransactions. It's a first-person shooter multiplayer game. They're all fucking doing it nowadays, and there's not much getting away from that. However, when these loot boxes can be rewarded without having to pay for microtransactions, I think that's perfectly fine. If you have a loot system that's just simply based around loot boxes, but you don't have to pay for them, then what's wrong with that? It's just another way of dealing out loot to people. And this is where the line between microtransaction and loot box comes into the mix. Many games have loot boxes nowadays, that is very clear. However, it's never specifically said that loot boxes are only obtainable through money. It's just one way of getting them. You can actually usually get loot boxes in-game with most of these games. Now, I know it's usually very rare to get the currency that you buy these loot boxes with. However, in more games nowadays, such as Shadow of War, you can get the currency to buy these loot boxes pretty easily. There's a variety of different activities that you can do to get the currency to buy these loot boxes, and you can also get loot boxes as a reward due to certain activities in the game as well. It's a similar case with Assassin's Creed Origins, Horizon Zero Dawn, Battlefront 2. They all have loot boxes in one way or another, but they can all be obtained by doing activities in the game and simply playing the game, whereas the microtransaction loot boxes are there for people that don't have enough time to experience the full game. Now, many people have argued if you don't have enough time, don't buy the fucking game, and in all fairness, I don't think that's a very fair argument. person. Most people, they have jobs, they have many things they have to commit themselves to, but they also have a passion for video games, and they don't have enough time in their day to be able to dedicate enough time to be able to experience the fullness of a game, especially considering the amount of games that have been coming out recently. There's so many of them, and you need lots of time to be able to put into these games. So if someone else wants to spend extra money on a game to be able to get their experience out of it, I don't see why it's affecting you, because you don't have to buy them. Like, there's nothing forcing you anywhere in these games that I've mentioned that force you to buy loot boxes. And considering you can get them relatively easily in game, I don't see the problem here really. People are overreacting about these things because they feel as if it's ruining the video game industry completely. And if you look past all of those things, if you really hate loot boxes, you can see there's some really good games out there, and if people want to put extra money into it, that's their problem, that's not yours. Microtransactions aren't ruining the video game industry, but they certainly aren't making it better. They add nothing for me to the game, because obviously I choose to not buy them because I have no interest in that. They take away nothing from the game, and they add nothing to the game either, because I simply just ignore them, and I've had a pretty good experience in all of the games that many people have complained about loot boxes. Obviously, if microtransactions were to be taken out of the video game industry and people were to never use them again, it would be a good thing for me, because developers would be able to work on other areas of the game instead of implementing these microtransactions, and I think the games would be just that tiny bit better. In all fairness, it wouldn't make a difference to how I play games. I never buy loot boxes, it's never something that I consider doing in games, because I've already paid my amount of money towards a game. I'm not going to pay more unless it's for some form of DLC or expansion, then I think that's reasonable. Unless of course that DLC is cut content from the game, then I think that is kind of scummy. Although if it's being worked on independently from the game as an expansion that's being worked on as the game's coming out, then I think that's fine. That's another topic for another day. DLC is a completely different part of the gaming industry that many people hate, and today's video is about loot boxes and microtransactions. I don't blame you for not liking microtransactions. They're a bad thing and they don't need to be in games. However, my problem does arise when people say a game is bad solely because it features microtransactions. I mentioned this in my last video, and it's just an unfair argument. Microtransactions can definitely be a contributing factor to why a game is made worse. It's definitely one of the worst parts about Shadow of War, although it doesn't inherently make a game bad instantly, especially if it's dealt with in a way that makes it so players who want to play the game without paying them can enjoy the entire experience without having difficulties or being forced to buy them. My rule is that if they don't affect my overall experience, and if they're not forced upon me, then it doesn't bother me at all. I'm not saying I support microtransactions, I'm just saying that if they don't affect my experience and I can play the game and enjoy it without having to buy them, then that's perfectly fine by me. The people that do want to buy them and want to put their money into it, that's perfectly fine. It's not my money, it's theirs, so they can do whatever they want with it. Overall, loot boxes and microtransactions are two different things. There are games that have loot boxes in them that don't force you to pay microtransactions to get them. Horizon Zero Dawn, Assassin's Creed Origins, and even Shadow of War. It doesn't force you to buy these microtransactions. I know many people that have completed the game and never once used a microtransaction. People are blowing this way out of proportion. However, that doesn't mean you can't be completely against microtransactions. I completely understand it. The same goes for loot boxes. If you don't like loot boxes in video games, you can be against it. That's perfectly fine. And I understand where the argument comes from, that if you give developers leeway in this situation, then they will take it and do ridiculous things with it, and they'll make it so microtransactions are forced upon people at some point. However, I've made it very clear that if it gets to that point, I will no longer be supporting developers that do this, and I know many other people are of the same mindset as me. I'm pretty complacent right now as long as these microtransactions don't affect my overall experience and I can just enjoy the game and completely ignore them. Although if it gets to the point that they're affecting my experience and it's like requiring me to buy them just to play the base game, then I'll most likely be more strong with my opinions, let's say, because that's not what should happen. I don't even think that games like Shadow of War and Assassin's Creed Origins have any business having microtransactions in the first place. They're single player games. I find it really strange that microtransactions like this are included in single player RPGs. It makes no sense to me. Multiplayer games, it makes a lot more sense because there's a lot more progression in it, and loot boxes with microtransactions are definitely been used for a very, very long time in multiplayer games, and they don't really inflict on your experience whatsoever in most games. So I think they've got a good balance with multiplayer games, although it doesn't make much sense sense to me in single player games. It really doesn't make sense at all to have microtransactions, and I am against them. I'm definitely against them in games like Shadow of War, in games like Assassin's Creed Origins, and other single player RPGs that are coming out soon, and you know, maybe we'll see more. I really don't hope this sets a trend, because I think it's a bad business practice to have microtransactions in a single player game, but as long as they're not affecting my overall experience, I don't mind. That's my verdict on microtransactions. And loot boxes, they're not always associated with microtransactions, as I said earlier. Loot boxes can be done well, as is seen in Horizon Zero Dawn. There's no microtransactions in that game at all, but there are loot boxes, and I think this will be the case for Assassin's Creed Origins. Only time will tell. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling about this now. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead and like and subscribe for more gaming news, reviews, and content in the future. I'll most likely be doing a Shadow of War review when I finish the game, because I've been really enjoying it. You know, I have been really enjoying this game. Many people have been saying that it's bad and shit-talking the game, but I genuinely do think it's a great time, and I've been having a lot of fun. It's quite sad to see all the flack it's getting due to these microtransactions. However, I hope at some point people realize that Shadow of War is a genuinely good game and deserves praise, and not just a bunch of flack and people shit-talking it. That's my verdict on everything. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.